Hey, welcome to the Beginner Photography Podcast. This week we are talking with travel photographer and educator John Greengo about what goes into building a great image. So let's get into it.
Welcome to the Beginner Photography Podcast, a weekly podcast for those who believe that moments matter most and that a beautiful photo is more than just a sum of its settings. A show for those who want to do more with the gear they have to take better photos today. And now, your host, Raymond Hatfield.
Welcome back, my photo friends, to this week's episode of the Beginner Photography Podcast. We got a good one for you. I'm super excited. We got a great interview that really left me thinking about my images just a little bit differently, and I know that you will too. But first, I do want to pause and I want to give a shout out to both, I believe it's Manetsky and Nisatachi, who left 5-star iTunes reviews for the podcast. They said, let's see, Manetsky said, I just recently found the podcast and corresponding Facebook page. I've already learned so much. Raymond does a great job teaching, and it almost feels like he is just a friend giving me great advice. I even told my son, another budding photographer, to listen. Thank you for this wonderful podcast. Manetsky, I don't know if that's your real name. I don't know if that's your last name, but seriously, I cannot tell you thank you enough for that. I truly do appreciate it. I'm glad that you are enjoying the podcast and getting a lot out of it as well, because obviously, this podcast is meant, well, honestly, selfishly, it's meant for me to be able to talk to photographers who are better than myself and get information that's going to help me progress, as a photographer. And the fact that you're coming along this ride with me and using it to build your skills as a photographer as well is just so awesome to see. But then also we got Ni Satachi, again, not sure if that's a first name, last name, screen name, whatever it is. But they say this is the best way to begin taking your best pictures. I started with the first couple of episodes learning about exposure triangle, and this has given me the confidence to share my pictures. That's awesome. What a giant step right there. The community is great, and I cannot wait to learn more. Seriously, that thirst for knowledge is what excites me so much about this podcast, is that you can learn something, and then when you apply it to your own photography, or you get excited to apply it to your own photography, that is where the learning happens. You can listen to this podcast all day long, every day for the rest of your life. But if you don't take action on the things that you hear, it's, what's it for? How are you going to become a better photographer without that experience? So thank you again for sharing your experience and leaving an iTunes review, because seriously, that is one of the best ways to help out the podcast. So if you haven't left a review on iTunes, feel free to do so. I can't tell you how much I would appreciate it. Super easy to do. If you are in the iTunes app or the podcast app, just swipe up. You'll see down at the bottom an option to rate and review the podcast. You can do that there, and you will have my eternal thankfulness. Gratefulness? Anyway, let's get into this week's episode. There is a great chance that you know today's guest, John Greengo. If you've ever been on Creative Live, he hosts a ton of classes on there, like the insanely popular camera guides, where he will walk you through the setup and how to use your specific camera model. So super helpful. John, on top of that, is a very accomplished photographer who had kind of an unconventional start into photography, and I think you are going to love it. John has recently started his own education platform on his own website and has a ton of information and has brand new camera guides coming out. So if you have a newer model of a camera, that's going to be the place to find it there. So again, I really think that you're going to enjoy this episode. I know I sure did. So let's go ahead and get on into this interview with John Greengo right now. I think that many people today, myself included, probably found you teaching photography either on Creative Live or, doing camera guides, but you're a talented photographer. So before we get into kind of how you got to where you are today, let's start from the beginning. Where did it all start for you? When did you know that photography was going to play an important role in your life?
Well, it depends on when you want to start the story. Officially in college, I needed to take some art credits, and I took a photography class because it seemed like the best way for me to do art. But in reality, if I go back another, 10 or 15 years, I found a camera on the bike trail, and I don't know whose it was. I took out the roll of film and I threw it away, and I bought some more film, and this is 110 film. And I just started shooting photos of my friends and doing things. I took it to school, would photograph the school sports. I didn't work for the school newspaper or anything like that. I was just walking around taking pictures of my friends and things that we would do in the backyard. And I just thought everybody did that. And so I was doing that really early on. And I remember going to the city track meet, and at the University of Washington, they had this huge stadium, but they had this weird like gully. It's where all the rainwater went. And I went down into that kind of lower trench and was photographing my friends from this really low angle. And I got this really cool photo, at least I thought at the time. And I realized that what I did as a photographer had an impact on the final image. It wasn't just what happened, it's what you did to it as well. And so I think that's kind of where things started.
Well, how long was that progression from when you found that camera to when you took that photo?
Oh, probably 5 years.
5 years. So in that time, was that photo that you took that, you first fell in love with there at the gully, what it was that made that photo stand out to you? It was simply the composition, or were you trying to learn camera, basics and how to work a camera up until that point as well?
No, wasn't any interest in camera. I mean, as much interest as a 6-year-old has in taking pictures with their phone of their dog. They just want to get pictures of their dog. And so it really wasn't any sort of conscious, like, I want to learn photography or I'm going to be a photographer. No, it's just, this is fun. This is interesting. And what can I do and how can I show it and make it look interesting? And so I guess that was my discovery of point of view. It's like, oh, it changes when you go high and low and over here and there. And that just was the start of a very long journey, you might say.
So what happened next for you? Is that when you thought, oh, I have to dive much deeper into this whole world of photography?
Well, it was that kind of background noise that I didn't even understand at the time. And then in college, I took the class and it was kind of immediate, like, oh, this is awesome. This is really cool, because I tend more towards the technical side, but there was something about just dabbling that hand in that artistic little bit over there that was, I don't know, was wrong, but felt good. And so I wanted to pursue photography. And really, if you're going to school and, proper education on it, there's only 2 routes to become a photographer, which seems horribly strange from probably our perspective, where no, there's a million different things you can do as photography. But in college, you're either going to work for a newspaper or be a fine art photographer. That's right. It. Those are the only 2 ways to get some sort of official degree. And I said, I'll be a newspaper photographer. And so that's the direction I went.
Where do you think that took you? Like, as far as learning there in college, what do you think surprised you most after having a camera already in your hand for a few years? What did college give you when it came to photojournalism?
Well, the thing about going to college and actually having a degree, which is very strange. I don't know if you find very many people that you interview or you talk with, but it's extraordinarily rare to find somebody who is in photography that has a degree in photography. Right. It's usually something that people go to school for and then it just doesn't pan out and they're on to something else. And all the regular professionals are people who picked it up and made it work. And so, I hear a lot of people who say, well, I just picked up photography on my own. And one of the things I find is, okay, well, that's admirable. That's very good. But there's oftentimes a lot of holes in the education. And when you go to school, as we all have done, and we know, you got to take all these classes that seem like they're completely unrelated. And, I had to take chemistry because that's a part of photography, or it was at the time. And so it gave me, I think, a very good rounding out of the education. And I mean, in some ways, everything I know now was nothing I learned in school. It's all been since then, but it made for a nice base for the rest of the learning.
Oh, I like that. Did you end up going into photojournalism at all after that?
Well, I did. I had internships at a couple of different papers. From the school newspaper, I succeeded pretty quickly there. It was like my first day on the job, I got a cover, which was extraordinarily rare. And wow. I got lots of features and lots of cover shots, which means you were doing well. And I got picked up at internships pretty quickly. But when I graduated from college, I had the unfortunate incident of bad timing with the US economy. And basically nobody was hiring. And all the large newspapers that had 10, 15, 20 photographers there, they were laying off and letting people go early. And then those people were getting jobs at small town newspapers. And so when somebody like me came out of college, it really didn't matter how good I was, or at least that's what I'd like to think. There's just no jobs for you. And so I was, first thinking I want to work in the Northwest where I grew up, in the Seattle area someplace. And then it became like, okay, I'm sending resumes East Coast. I'm going deep South. I'm going Northeast. I'm any place that might have an opening, I'm sending resumes. And the fact is I failed. Never got a full-time job at the newspaper. And we know now that may have been for the best for me, because that industry has just been decimated.
So then what did you do when you sent out all those resumes? And
I figured, okay, well, I'm just going to continue sending out resumes, but I got to earn some money in the meantime. I know photography, I'll get a job at the camera shop. And so I got a job working downtown, taking the bus downtown, working at 9 to 5 camera shop, selling cameras. And that was just completely different from what I knew in photography. I mean, yeah, I knew shutter speed, aperture, ISO, but now you need to know about these different brands and these point and shoot cameras and binoculars and other things. And it was really hard. I mean, I had just a hard ass manager take me into a little tiny closet and was just screaming at me that I need to know how the Chinon Genesis 3 focuses, because it uses a hybrid focusing system and I need to memorize that. And I had to learn 50 new cameras, as quickly as possible.
Oh my gosh. So did that kind of just enable you to continue shooting for yourself at that point, having access to, or I guess what you said earlier was that like you really fell in love with photography in the beginning, kind of for the technicals, that's like where your wheelhouse was. And then the art side was everything else. So when you're at the camera shop and you have to learn all these cameras, would you say that strengthened your affinity for photography, or was it getting out and kind of exploring those things and getting those artistic shots on your own?
It was a test of desire at that point, because there's a lot of great people, a lot of very, very talented photographers that end up working in the camera shop, and you get slowly drawn away from what you actually truly love. I mean, I can imagine it happens with musicians who, they're trying to get their band started and they pick up a job at the music shop, and then they end up just selling stuff and they play less and less on their own. And so I tried to get out and go shooting on my own. And it was always something kind of tough because I never made lots of money and film was expensive back in those days. So, why do you want to just go out and blow $40 in film and developing when it's not going anywhere and that's not doing anything? And so I selectively chose places in which to push myself photographically, but I was doing it more than all my other colleagues. And so I was like, well, this will end up someplace, hopefully. And it's what I enjoy doing at the time.
Yeah. So today, successful landscape, travel, nature photographer. Tell me what that transition was like, leaving the store. And did you go straight into full-time working as a photographer at that point?
No, there's a bit of an odd transition. It was a bit of leap of faith. And so I was just kind of following my own path. I'm going to give you the short version because it could go on too long. But I have a close friend that we love doing adventurous things. And so we decided to go for a bike ride, and to be really adventurous, we decided to do a bike ride around Iceland. And I decided, well, we need to document this and we're going to take lots of photos. And he was just into photography a little bit. And I got my Kodak rep to sponsor us by giving us 50 rolls of film. And so that was a big help for it. Wow, and we didn't have to do anything in for that, but we ended up putting together what I would kindly call a Ken Burns style documentary of our trip. And we then presented that at various locations. And somehow word got to a photographer named Art Wolf that a number of people will know. And I was at one of his shows and I was hanging around after his big presentation because I wanted to see how his projector system was working, because he had a 3 projector. It was a very cool visual display. And I was hanging around and everybody was gone. And he's like, well, what are you doing here? I'm like, oh, I wanted to see what you're using on your projectors because I want to figure out how to do this because I'm doing a slideshow on Iceland. And he goes, Iceland? Well, I'm going to Iceland next year. I'd like to see what you've shot. This is now pre-internet, where you can't just go on the internet and say, what does Iceland look like? What are the top shots? You got to look at books, so you got to talk to photographers where they've been, see their stuff. And then, so he and I struck up a relationship, and it was about 10 years later that he was doing the TV show Travels to the Edge, and he asked me to be a part of the traveling TV crew. And so we would travel to Africa and South America and Asia and film these TV shows for Travels to the Edge, which still can be found on PBS and other places. And so that kind of broke me out of the camera store. And then eventually that hooked me up with Creative Live, where I started teaching.
Oh my gosh. So many, like that route right there. That you're right. So many things. It's a very roundabout way of getting to where you are today. I guess when it comes to what was it that was the hardest part? What was the biggest struggle for you when you decided, okay, I'm going to leave the safe technical world of working in a camera shop and just learning the settings and all the, essentially the manual, and then regurgitating that to customers, and then actually going out and putting those things into practice? What was the biggest struggle for you in that time?
Well, probably when I was at the camera shop, I was in my 30s, and I'm like, I can't do this in my 40s. By the time I turned 40, I've got to break free. The problem is that when you're in the camera shop, at least for me, you see so many people who fail in the pursuit of photography. I would help people. I remember one woman specifically came in, she quit her job doing this, and she was going to specialize in photography, and she bought, thousands of dollars of all the top of the line gear. It didn't seem like she knew that much. And then you'd see this over and over again, and you'd see people who worked in the camera store, they like, I'm going to quit and become a fine art photographer. And then they're back in 6 months. And you'd see all these yo-yo situations of people trying to do stuff. And there is a very big thing in photography about, I love photography, so I want to become a professional.
Yeah.
And it's a very dangerous leap of faith to want to do that. It just, so many people want to do it. And I've taken the track of saying, I don't teach people to be professional photographers. I will teach you how to take professional quality photographs. But if you want to pursue professional photography, there's a whole business into it that is completely different than how to operate one of these things. And right. I think there's a very different world between those two.
So then, just to clarify, the issue was not that people weren't taking professional quality photos. It was the business side that they were struggling with, and eventually would come back.
Yeah. And I think what most people don't realize is that if you wanted to become a professional photographer, in my opinion, you should go to college if you can, and you should get a degree in business, and you should get a minor in photography, and do that on the weekends. And where I am now, I consider myself a professional photographer, although there's some people out there that would argue and tell me that I'm not a professional photographer because I don't physically sell my print to somebody else for cash in a direct exchange in that regard. And so anything other than that is, you're not a professional photographer. But from where I am now, when you are a professional photographer, in my mind, the number one thing is your business, and the number two thing is you get to take photos.
Yeah.
I've done my own interviews of other photographers, and one of the questions I would always ask them is, how much photography do you actually get to do in your business? And for most people, it seemed to be 10 to 20% at the max, but usually in the 5 to 10% range.
Yeah, that'd be a good day. You got 20% of your day's worth of photography. That would be, yeah. Because I mean, when you think about it, especially for wedding photographers, you're shooting one day a week, maybe Saturday and a Sunday. Mm-hmm. So let's just say one day a week. And then, you're not shooting 52 weddings a year. At least I'm not shooting 52 weddings a year. So when you break that down to a percentage, it's rather small. It's rather small.
And I bet on that wedding day, if you really think about it, a good third of it is just dealing with the logistics and communication and talking with
Sure.
people. And then it's like, okay, here's the 10 minutes that I really need to be photographing. And here's another 10 and there's another 10.
Yeah. That's a very good way to put it, for sure. Yeah. When I want to know though, I want to kind of go back to those early days for you. And I know that as an educator now, you probably see a lot of photos from other photographers at various stages of their journey. But for you in particular, when you look back at some of your earliest photos from a technical standpoint and the eye that you have today, what were some of those earliest mistakes that you were making with your photographs?
I think the earliest mistake was assuming that pretty close was good enough. And so, I'd have something where there's, let's see, where there'd be like a little stick hanging in over here on the frame. And I didn't bother cropping it out because it's like, well, don't worry about that over there. It's over here that the action is, and not really going hard enough on quality. And maybe luckily back in those days, I think before digital, there was just a certain little softness that was acceptable in an image. Well, that's pretty close. Yeah, that you put that in the resume, that's fine. And taking a moment in time that it was, and that's still hard, is you get a very good moment, but it's technically imperfect. You still use it or not. And sometimes the moment eclipses any imperfection in it. And but it's got to be a really good moment to eclipse that technicality. And nowadays, oh, God forbid anybody is just a bit off in focus. I mean, we can handle it a little off on exposure. We were able to fix that up a little bit, but the camera, I'm still waiting for Lightroom adjustment on focus forward, back, greater depth of field.
Yeah, we'll see when that comes. That's going to be incredible. What do you think that's going to mean for? Hold on. Yeah, okay, let's go there. What do you think that means for the world of photography in a world where it's like there is there's let me preface this by saying I believe there's two types of photos. There's photographs and then there's snapshots, right? One is taken with intention, one is just, here we go, let's just grab this photo. Where do you think the intention is going to come in on, I guess, the professional side or trying to level up your photography when we will be living in a world where everything, including focus, including depth of field, can be changed in post-production?
Well, we've traveled a long way in that direction already, where there are people who are taking very good photos with all sorts of equipment, and many times you can't even tell what the type of equipment was, provided they're in the right place at the right time. The change that's happened in photography, in my mind, is that because so many people are using phones, there's a lot less people who are buying a camera. And when they buy a camera, whether it's $300 or a $500 or $1,000 camera, in their mind they're going through something like, this is a thing, and I am going to get into this thing. My sister had a Canon AE1 that she took to Europe with her, which is like that's the thing you did back in the 70s.
Yeah.
Now, if you want to go on a trip and take photos, most people are just going to take their phones, and they're not into photography. And so there's this separation of people who are just satisfied with the phone and the people who are getting into photography. And over the last even 3 years, the opportunities for buying a $500 entry-level camera, it's up to $1,000 if you want to get like an entry-level camera. And so there's this diminishing group up here at the top that I'm going to say we're both probably in, of people who like high-end gear and really pursue the craft of photography. And it's just going to get smaller and smaller. And it might become, I don't know, think like painters. How many painters do you know right now? And there's probably not many. But if you went back long enough, there's probably a lot of people who sketched and, I draw pictures of my kids sometimes because it's nice to have them on their birthday or something. And there's just fewer and fewer people who do that. And I'm completely forgetting what the original question was. But I think
all about I think kind of the future of computational photography. And if that market is shrinking, I guess, of professionals who do want intentional photographs, what's next?
It's going to be harder and harder competition, I think, for anybody who is a professional. But There is never going to be, I'm not a wedding expert, but I never believe there is going to be a replacement for the dedicated wedding photographer in your case. They're not just going to be able to crowdsource phone images from everyone. And I know they've tried that, and yeah, there's some fun things that you can do with it, but you never truly replicate, quality altar shots and couple shots and things like that with just people randomly taking photos. The 1,000 monkeys on the typewriter just doesn't work in photography when you're in key moments trying to get good shots.
Yeah.
But there is going to be a limited collection. I mean, there's probably going to be more people who are accepting of just their friends' iPhone photos for their wedding.
Right. Yeah, I've been to plenty of weddings where it's like the day after or even the week after, the couple will post just a photo that their friend took from their cell phone, on Facebook. And you think to yourself, like, okay, like this is enough for you. That's okay. That's okay. Well, I want to go back to what you were talking about earlier as far as, what is it that you put in your portfolio, specifically when it comes to moment, because in photography, we obviously have moment, we have light, we have the technicals, we have composition. And knowing that they're all important, when you go out and shoot, is there one that you focus on maybe a little bit more than the rest?
Yeah, I would say I'm probably more on composition right now. Moment was more important when I was doing photojournalism and sports photography. And when you're working with people, I think moment is key. And I've been doing a little bit more travel and landscape, and travel can be people or not people. Anytime people are involved, moment is huge. It's hard to compare with light and composition because they all count and stuff. But for other things, I like the area of composition. I've been working on. I recently put out a kind of a short composition class, and I'm kind of in the background working on a long composition class. And I've been doing a lot of teaching over the years, and things like focus and exposure. There's kind of this limited number of checklist of things you need to know about, that I can teach about, that you can learn about. And every once in a while there's a new piece of technology, and okay, now we have focus stacking. Well, here's this new one thing. And I've been teaching a composition class locally, and I've been telling the students, I go, the list of things that I have in this class here, to me, are like gold coins. They are just gems that I'm holding on to. And if I can find one more thing, one more compositional idea, I get really excited. And, I took my composition class a couple of years ago, and I decided, okay, I'm going to scour YouTube. I'm going to scour the internet. I'm going to go to the library and rent all the composition books. And I'm going to try to accumulate any other ideas that I haven't come up with on my own or been exposed to. And I picked up several more. But I think it's an exciting world because it's like wrangling cats, talking about composition. There's so many different aspects to it. And I think it's a fun hobby to be obsessed with, as kind of a sidelight to being a photographer. It's like, oh, I can work with this one little thing here, and that's going to help make the photograph a little bit better. And so I think it's a fun area that's got it's got endless possibilities. And I think that's what's so fun about it, is having something that really has no limitations.
Yeah, it sure does feel that way sometimes, especially when, first of all, let's go ahead and wrangle some cats and talk about composition here for a moment, because I know, and I'm sure that you know as well, like this is a very complicated topic to talk about, because oftentimes you can be looking at one scene and get multiple compositions just in the way that you move your camera just a tiny bit. So how do you talk about composition to new photographers? Is it, here's a composition, go look for it? Or if you're in this situation, look for these compositions?
Well, for a lot of my classes, and I sometimes do talks where I just, ideas about things. And one of my favorite talks is called The Photographer's Eye. And it really looks at how we see the world with our own eyes versus how a camera sees. And there's some really obvious things that are different about it, but there's a lot of things that are a little bit more subtle about the way that we just absorb information. For instance, one area is, what do we pay attention to when we look at with our own eyes? And I think, this is maybe my personal opinion, one of the most important things that we look at is anything that moves. That was just kind of ingrained into us in the grasses in Africa. If it moves, you got to pay attention to it. And so when we look around the world and we see something moving, we're like, oh, that's kind of interesting. Let's look at that. That would make a good photo. And then you have to like turn it around and think, okay, well, what does this look like at different shutter speeds? And is it actually as interesting as it seems? And really identifying when you look at something and you get that desire to pull the camera out, what exactly is making you excited? Is it the color? Is it the movement? Is it the background? Is it the lighting? And really being able to distill into very specific words why you are interested in this particular subject.
Sorry, I had a cough there. So obviously, I love that because it really forces you to use the camera more as a tool than hope that it's going to be the miracle worker, you know, like it really forces you to get into your brain and ask yourself those tough questions. And I find that I struggle with like, so let's dive a little bit deeper into maybe different compositions, because, you know, we have the rule of thirds, we have leading lines, we have framing. And I think that those are probably the three best ones that I try to showcase to new photographers. Like if you can start with these three, you're going to be on a good path right there. But after those three, is there anything else that you have found a lot of fun in lately, or just something that you have found really interesting and are enjoying when it comes to composition?
Well, okay, so there's one compositional thing that I came upon somehow. I had a photo that I had taken on an adventure, and I just really liked the photo, and I couldn't define why I liked the photo for a long time. It was just, there was something about it. And this is a slight side note. If you can't define what you like or you don't like about the photo, you need to improve your language and understanding of composition, because I think everything can be distilled down to understanding why it's good and why it's not. I do not accept looking at a photo and going, it's great. I can't say why, but it's just great. No, I want to know why. And so one of the things that I really liked about this photo is that there was a bit of spotlight on the person. And so we know that, you know, lighting and spotlighting is really nice, but it had along the bottom, as if I do right here, it had kind of a shadow right along the bottom of the frame here. And it was like, well, it's kind of interesting because it gets darker and as it goes to the edge of the frame, and it just kind of, it's like, you know, bumper bowling where you got the lanes filled with bumpers, so you can never get a gutter. And so the shadow is kind of like this soft edge to the frame. And it just kind of, your eye looks at the bright area, and then it comes down to the edge and goes, oh, it's dark, no longer interesting. So it goes back there. So it kind of keeps your eye framed in without having to go to the hard edge of the frame. So I call it shadow framing. And so when there's a nice shadowed edge along the frame, and so there's a dark area. So like up here, you see how it gets kind of darker. It's like a vignette. This is actually just the lighting on the background. But your eye goes, okay, well, there's something light here. So I'm going to go here, and then less interesting, less interesting. I really don't want to go back here. Let's go back to the light. And it naturally brings your eye. And so that natural vignette, so a vignetting, a shadow framing, I think is just a great way of subtly highlighting your subject and bringing your viewers' eyes right to where you want them.
I like that, shadow framing. And is that something that you learned, or is this like a term that you've kind of just come up with on your own?
I made that term up alone. So that maybe is my one contribution to photography.
I promise you have a whole lot more than that, you know, just by looking at any sort of reviews or anything, by just somebody trying to learn how to use your camera. I know that you are a fantastic educator when it comes to those things, because it can be difficult, you know, as you know. I mean, each camera is so different, and it is it's tough. So you're doing a huge service to the world, and I know that a lot of people appreciate you for sure. But I got a question about going out, because you've been to all 7 continents. You have been to, I believe, more than 50 countries to go photograph.
Sounds about right.
There's a lot of weight when you are in Antarctica or you're in Africa and you're trying to get the shot and you're not sure if you're going to be able to. And just yesterday in the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group, one of the listeners, his name is Max, he posted and he just said, guys, I have, like, my last 2 or 3 times I've went out to shoot mostly flowers. He focuses on flowers. He said, I just didn't capture anything that I was happy with. So for you, when the stakes are high, you're in another continent, you're in another country. How do you deal with that when there's more of a pressure to produce?
Well, I I would classify myself as a very hopeful photographer. Okay.
Hopeful photographer.
Hopeful photographer. Okay. You could have the worst of the situation right now. And, there could be a great photo in here.
Mhm.
And here's what I would encourage people to do. Think about their top 10 photos, whatever they may be, and pick one of them to really think about the situation you were in when you took that great photograph, and then think that photograph minus 5 or 10 minutes. 5 or 10 minutes before that photograph was taken, what was going through your mind? Were you thinking that you were about to take one of your best photographs that you've ever taken? And I know when I go back to some of mine, I'm like, no, I was just walking along like any other day. And I was
Right.
out shooting and I had my camera with me. I was ready for the moment, but I had no idea it was coming. And then you made a situation, it developed, you saw potential and you worked the situation. And so, I like to say that you are within 5 minutes of taking one of your best portfolio shots right now at any given time, provided the right state of mind, provided the right eyes and the right thinking about the situation. You could be waiting for a bus for 4 hours because you have a horrible transfer, and there might be something just outside of your vision if you just wander around just a little bit. Now, I'm not saying that's always going to happen, but you never know when you're 5 minutes away. And if you think of that as every time you're out, you sometimes just have to be thinking, okay, where is it? What can it be? And I have to admit, sometimes I get burned out and I'm like, there's just nothing going on. There is just nothing going on. And you got to switch your mindset up. And I think one of the greatest things that you can do is do a photography workshop with other people. And I plan on doing more once we get through this whole pandemic thing. And I really want to showcase how different people look at the same scene differently. And when you go out with other photographers and you look at their work and you're like, I walked right by that. I didn't think that
Yeah.
could be a photograph. And I think that sort of education is really good because there's just so many different ways of looking at the world.
Right. Oh, wow. There are so many different ways of looking at the world. I got to think about that for a minute. Not the different ways of looking at the world part, obviously, because that's obvious. But I mean, when it comes to, so then when do you know when to move on? When do you know when to pack up? If the next best photo is perpetually 5 minutes away, how do you know when the day's done?
Oh, that is one of the most troubling questions. I've had so many situations where either it's turned out great or it's been nothing. And I'm thinking, well, do I give it another 5 minutes? Do I give it another 10 minutes? And usually what happens is if I say I'll give it another 5 minutes, then I'll give it another 5 minutes and then another 5 minutes. And so I've come to the point where I'll just like, this is worth 15 minutes of my time to see if this thing plays out the way that it possibly could. And I'll just keep an eye on my watch and I'll just say, okay, that was worth my 15 minutes. And I thought about it. I knew how much I wanted to invest. I knew what other things were going on and what I had to deal with. And so, I've had to do that a lot. And it is strange because sometimes you get a great shot. And sometimes I feel like I want to drive home right now and download and back up this memory card because it's just not going to get any better. But when you're in a good situation, most of the time we're not photographing. We're not in a good situation. So when you find yourself there, even if you feel good about having got just a really take-home keeper, stay at it because you are in the moment of opportunity and you have to take advantage of that. When it's not working out well, figure out, okay, well, what's not working and what can you do otherwise? Give it a time and cut loose, get out of there.
So first of all, thank you for sharing that. But now I have two split questions, or I guess I don't have two. You kind of shoot two very different styles of photography, one being nature, birds, animals, and then the other one being landscapes. When it comes to those two, I would assume that they have very different planning processes, right? So let's say, Mount Fuji, you're going to get the photo of Mount Fuji. But when you want to go and photograph polar bears aren't always going to be there, right? So in the situation where we're going to sit down and we're going to wait the 15 minutes, are we referring more to nature and like the motion of what you were talking about earlier? Or is this kind of for everything? And can that work for landscape photography as well?
That was a little bit more everything, because I think once you can identify a genre that you're working in, there's techniques that'll work better and not. I mean, if you go to Mount Rainier National Park right about now, you're going to start getting some beautiful wildflowers out there. If you go there at noon and wait for 15 minutes for the light to get better, that ain't going to happen. And so that's about planning and getting there. And for shooting wildlife, I don't consider myself a wildlife expert. I'm pretty proficient at it when I am in that realm. Working with Art Wolf, who did a lot more of it than I ever did. Anyone who has any thought of doing wildlife photography, it's the real estate thing: location, location, location. You can work as hard as you want in your city, state, park, but if it's not where the animals are, it's going to be a terrible experience. It's going to be really, really hard to do. And so it's all about getting to where the animals are in that regard. And so that's more timing in that regard.
First of all, thank you for clearing that up, or clarifying that. That is, yeah, because that's one of those things. It's like, oftentimes as a wedding photographer, I know I'm going to show up to a wedding. I know there's going to be a bride. I know there's going to be a groom. I know there's going to be a kiss. I can plan my whole day around what is going to happen at a wedding, because it happens every single time, right? So has there ever been a time where you wanted to go out and photograph something specific, and the day turned wildly different than what you were expecting because of just elements out of your control?
Oh, yeah. More times than I can ever remember.
Oh.
I'll share one experience with you. I was going down to photograph the Space Needle on New Year's Eve. They shoot fireworks off the top of the Space Needle. And I've lived in the town my whole life. And right next to it is the Mopop Museum, which is this really weird looking building that has metallic and purple and silver sides to it. And I go, okay, well, I want to photograph right next to the building, reflecting the lights of the fireworks. I was just really specific because I knew the area and I knew what was going to happen. And I went down early. I got my camera set up, got some nice composition. And then the security agents all came through and said, we got to clear this area out, and you can't be anywhere in this area. So you got to go beyond that fence back there. And I was like, no, I was basing everything on this one composition. Right. And so it is roughly 30 minutes to midnight. We're at the Seattle Center in downtown Seattle, which is filled with thousands and thousands of people filling every viewpoint of the Space Needle. So there's nothing left. Okay. There's no interesting thing right next to stand to have a nice clear view. I mean, you can barely get a clear view without standing in the middle of a crowd. And so I'm just like, okay, well, if I can get a good photo here, this is going to be a good story, because there is nothing. It is garbage everywhere for blocks and blocks around. And I eventually found this one area. There's a bunch of people lined up, and there was this art sculpture that had kind of fake bamboo metal posts sticking way up in the air. They're like 40 feet up in the air. And if you stood on one side of them, it would block the view of the Space Needle. So nobody was standing on one side of them, because that would be stupid. Why would you stand someplace that blocks the view of the fireworks? But if you stand in the right place, the Space Needle is framed right between the bamboo fake metal pieces that go up, and It becomes a very interesting silhouette, of which everything else looks really nice behind it. And so it was one of these weird areas, like I mentioned before, photographer's eye, things look different to the eye, to the camera. To the human eye and the human experience, standing here is stupid because there's something blocking your view. But from the camera, it's a nice framing and it looks wonderful. And so finding that magical mismatch of viewing versus photographing, and I was all by myself. I had nobody for 20, 30 feet around me, because people thought I was crazy. Why would you be photographing there? It looks bad to the eye. No, it looks great. It looks great in the camera.
That is too funny. You know what I love about that story? First of all, it's great that you were able to get the shot. But I think that a lot of people listening are probably myself included, honestly. If I was in that situation, like I had my heart set on the photo and then it got shut down, I would probably just be like, well, okay, I guess I'm just going to enjoy the experience tonight. And that's going to be that. And I love the tenacity of like, oh no, I'm going to make this work somehow. And then finally getting that. Would you be able to share that photo that I could post in the show notes, so that if anybody's listening?
I'll get you a copy of that photo.
Perfect. Awesome. Let's keep going on to some landscape photos here, because when it comes to landscape photography, I guess specifically, I have a photo that I'm thinking of from your own Instagram where you took a photo of prayer flags in, I believe, possibly Budapest or maybe not Budapest, but the photo is of prayer flags. They all converge in the center, but then there's one bird that just like flew right over the top of the image. And I remember in your in the comment on Instagram, essentially it's talking about like, wow, like what a moment, like imagine, like the fact that this thing happened is really fantastic, and it was completely out of your control. Would that photo, do you think, stand on its own without the bird?
Yeah, it would probably be dropped 1 star in quality.
Just 1 star. So then go on.
Yeah, no, I think that's one of those situations where you put yourself in the right place to get lucky. And that was actually in Bhutan. I was doing one of my Bhutan tours, and we're going over a hill pass, and there's all these prayer flags, and there was this kind of beautiful fog, mist, low-level clouds around that kind of gave us a nice clean background to everything, you might say. And I was lining up the shot, and you see that thing that enters the corner of the frame, and you're thinking, shoot, don't think about it, just ask questions later, and maybe it'll turn out right. And I have to admit that I have been a little bit lucky with some good bird action. I mean, it's almost like I have a bird filter that I add into certain photographs because they just come into the right place at the right time. And so, yeah, I think that one is, it's a nice shot on its own without the bird, and can work very well. But having that extra element, which is one of the compositional elements that I think is really important, that different photographers refer to it in different ways. I talked to one photographer who called it the cookie. It's like, oh, you found the cookie, you know, this little bonus treat that you get in the photograph that's perfectly fine without it, but it's just a little treat that you don't normally get, but it just added in there. It makes it extra special.
That is perfect right there. So why do you think, because you said that you think that you got like the special bird filter, right? Do you think that that just simply comes down to you being more open in a scene to things happening and giving it time and waiting to see how a scene evolves? Or do you think that there's something within you that birds just truly love and they're attracted to and happen to be in front of your lens?
No, that second part is, you know, obviously not the way it really is. I have more, I don't have bad big luck. I have bad little luck. I have lots of little things that go wrong, like, you know, shooting the fireworks and, oh, you just chose the wrong place to stand. I think it's, I'm trying to remember more about the first part of the question on that one.
It was, when it comes to, I guess, why do you think that you are, quote unquote, like lucky enough to get the birds in the frame so often?
I think that I've had so many things not work out on the photographs that I have planned. I have learned to be very flexible, like the fireworks shot. And so I go in with good intentions, and sometimes, no, I have a lot of planning, and it goes into the shot and it comes off and it is executed exactly the way I want to. But just as many times I go in with the intention, okay, I'm going to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm going to go here. I'm going to line up, and, oh, they've closed this off today, and now I've got to go over here, and I've never been here. I haven't checked this out on Google Maps, and where does this go, and what happens here? And, oh, look what I found here. And I know sometimes that fresh perspective where you're kind of new really helps out. I know I have a much easier time going to a new country and new city and trying to photograph there than I am going to my hometown of Seattle and photographing there. It's this new kid in the candy store. This is so fun. I've never tasted these flavors before. I think there's something pure and exciting and fun about that.
Wow. Do you think that's why people can get burnt out from photography? Like, do you think that's why there's such a drop-off rate in people who buy cameras versus, I guess, long-term professionals? You know, does that question make sense?
Yeah, I think that it certainly does affect some people. I mean, I remember working with one of my elder seniors at the camera shop, and he says, I don't go out and shoot Seattle anymore. I did that a lot when I was a kid, but I'm tired of that now. And, you know, yeah, you get kind of burned out on things, and it really is a matter of your creativity and looking at the world in a new way. You know, I started a project, it never went anywhere, but it was just kind of fun doing it for a while, which is, okay, well, I'm going to try to photograph Seattle in the rain. They complain about the rain here all the time. So I'm actually going to go out and try to photograph in the rain, which, by the way, is very difficult, but can be done. And there's a whole new set of possibilities that open up with reflections and puddles and dark skies. And there's a whole new thing that you get that when you aren't out at your normal time of day. And so once again, it's just your point of view, hopeful attitude at it. It can make a huge difference.
That's perfect. I love that. I love that. I think if somebody can take away one thing from this interview right here, I really hope that it's that, and it's finding kind of your thing and continuing to develop it and just putting your own unique perspective on it. That was wonderful. I know that a lot of listeners right now with a show called the Beginner Photography Podcast probably already own a camera, but as somebody who deals with a lot of cameras and gear and talking about these things, from your perspective, what do you think is the next thing that most new photographers should probably buy for their photography? And in a world of, mixed reviews for everything online, how do you choose which one is going to work best for you?
There's a lot packed in there.
That's my MO right there.
What to savor, what to dig into first. Pretty much all cameras are pretty incredible on the market right now. There's a limited number of systems, and there's your Canons, your Nikons. Actually, there's the two systems within each of those: DSLR and mirrorless, the Sonys, the Fujis, Olympus, Panasonic. And then you kind of get to the outskirts. And my first thing when I got into photography, which I'm very happy with the choice I made, is, I just went to my instructor and says, what do most professionals shoot? And at that time it was Nikon. So I got Nikon, and that allowed me to use lenses that were at the newspaper and places like that. And so just getting into a good system is the start for that. As far as the equipment goes, quality lenses will last you a lot longer than you imagine, I think, in many cases, if you take care of them, if you treat them well. You don't have to baby them, but just don't mistreat them. You can have a lens that works for 10, 15 more years, and it will be a great stablemate. The cameras, they kind of come and go a little too quickly, in my opinion.
I agree.
When people are complaining that the replacement model is not out a year and a half later, I think there's something wrong in the culture. I think 3-4 years is a perfect fine turnaround for an evolution of a camera model, and skipping models probably makes sense for most people unless they really, really specifically need those new features that came out. Mm-hmm. And so I would think more about quality glass than anything else.
So how do we know, again, like in this world of online reviews that are so mixed, how do we know like what's good and bad? Because specifically, let's talk about the Canon 50. There's the 1.8 for like $120. There's a 1.4 for like $400, and then the 1.2 for like almost $2,000. So like, how do we know what's going to be best for us when it comes to gear?
Well, I think there needs to be an understanding that there is an industry bias in the way reviews are done. Mm-hmm. And there might be a name for this that I don't know. And I encountered this when I was doing rock climbing in the past. And so me and my buddy were kind of amateur rock climbers, and we would go buy guides and go to national parks and go climbing. And we ran into this conundrum of the scale goes 1 to 6 or 1 to 5 point something or another. We were like 5.7, 5.8, 5.9 climbers. And, it's a moderate, steep climb up there. And all the books were geared to people doing 5.10, 5.11, 5.12 stuff. And we're like, how come there aren't as many climbs for people who are kind of lower end? And they go, because anybody who is qualified to write a book is not interested about the lower end. So think about any camera review you see. Sony introduced a camera yesterday. It's a vlogger camera. It's a pretty unimpressive camera by kind of high-end techie standards, but it's a solid camera for what some people are doing, but it is going to get the worst reviews and worst comments you've ever seen because it's not geared towards the higher end. We're obsessed in this culture of this microculture of photography of what's the high end, what's this new Nikon Z9? What's the new Nikon or Canon EOS 3? What's that going to be? Because that's the high end. It's going to be a $5,000 camera. So we're going to pay way too much attention to it. And this like basic level $1,000 camera is a really, really good value for a lot of people and will be perfectly fine for shooting professional photos for many people in many situations. Not everyone, but many.
Yeah.
And so
Isn't that funny how that happens? That's
yeah.
I always find that so strange where it's like, you know, in the sense of, so here's like a personal story here is that I had the Fuji X100V. I bought it. I wanted like a, you know, walk around camera that I could have. But it wasn't fitting like all of my needs perfectly. But I made a review on it on YouTube, and almost all the comments are like, "Well, you're dumb. Like you don't need that. That's not, you know, what the camera should be used for. It's like you should be a purist. You should only do this." And I was like, "Man, I'm just trying to take like a few seconds of video of my kids, and like I'm getting grilled over this, and it's not." Yeah, I think you're right, and it's unfortunate that we kind of live in that society. But I know that you are a great voice of reason when it comes to a lot of these things with your education that you do, as well as I know personally that there's a lot of members of the Beginner Photography Podcast who accredit you to teaching them how to use their camera, and they're very appreciative of that. So I know that you do a lot of education. We're also at the end of our time here. I want to say thank you so much for sharing everything that you did today. But before I let you go, can you let listeners know where they can find more about you online and your education and your awesome camera guides?
Sure thing. So my website is really easy. It's my name, johngringo.com. And so I have information there about the various things I do. The biggest change that I've made recently is I've started recording camera guides. This is my new little studio here. You're seeing just a portion of it here, a big old monitor that's normally over here, my best friend when it comes to classes, so I can show you things over here. And so I recently started recording classes myself and selling them directly. And for the last 10 years, I've been working with Creative Live, which was a fantastic experience. I put out around 100 classes with them. And those classes are still at Creative Live. You can find them at my website. So my website links you with my older classes and all my newer classes. And the great thing about my newer classes is that I don't have to do them all in one day in one take. Before I had to do this kind of one very long, grinding, hard day that fit a production schedule. And now my classes are exactly as long as they need to be. I was literally taking breaks in the class to cut material out that I had prepared for the class because it didn't fit the production schedule.
Oh no.
And that just kills you. It's like, I worked on this, it's important, it's part of the class, but we don't have time for it. And now, you know, the great thing about video like this is it doesn't have to be to the second with the commercials and what have you. And so I've got a bunch of new classes. And so I kind of do two things. If someone's never seen what I do a bunch of classes on individual cameras. And I have 6 new classes on new cameras. The latest ones, which are going to be coming out at the beginning of August 21 here, is on the R6. Actually, I brought out the R5. I was supposed to bring out the R6. I already have a class on the R5. The R6 is coming out, and then the Z7 II and Z6 II are coming out. And then I also do photography classes. And so now I'm in a rebuilding stage of my classes. And so I'm going to rebuild everything. And I have a composition essentials class out right now, which is designed not for beginner people. It's not beginning composition. It's just the essential things that all photographers need. And it's a nice package so that even somebody who's new or somebody who's been doing it for 30 years just wants a really good visual refresher course on a lot of big ideas and little ideas in composition. That kind of carries forward. But I have some new and exciting classes that I'll be bringing out. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and tell you, I haven't told anyone else I have a class coming out.
Ooh, exclusive.
And so people know I've been working on this in the background, but now this is more of an eminent class that's going to come out. So that was a little bit more of a basic level class. And so I want to come out with something higher end that I've been working on for close to the last 10 years, which is my master class on tilt shift photography. Wow. And so that's not coming out this month, but it's coming out in a few months. It's a in development announcement right now.
I love that. That is great.
And so I started shooting with tilt shift lenses 10 years ago. I've been working on this class for about 3 or 4 years, but I've got distracted because there were other things that had to come up. But it's going to be the most in-depth class ever. And if you've ever watched a YouTube video for 10 minutes on tilt shift lenses, yep, I've seen them all. Cute, very nice. This is going to be hours on tilt shift stuff that you haven't seen before in many cases.
Man, that is a whole world. I've never shot with a tilt shift lens in anything more than, like a lens baby or something, but nothing of the professional caliber of a tilt shift lens. And I'll be honest, they're a little bit intimidating. So I'm excited for the class to come out. I'm going to have to check it out and maybe get my hands on a tilt shift and see what I can come up with, because they've always intrigued me.
They are so much fun. They are so much fun, especially when you want to talk composition, because it just allows you a new dimension to move in.
Oh, that is so cool. Well, I'm excited for that. John, again, thank you so much for sharing everything that you did today. This conversation was a blast. I know that the listeners enjoyed it as well. And I look forward to keeping up with you in the future and seeing what you got going on going forward. So again, thank you so much.
Great. Thanks for having me on.
I think some of my favorite interviews are with those photographers who are very self-aware about their photography and just the way that they shoot, because the way that John is so self-aware about his photos and his process is what really makes him stand out, I think, as not only a photographer, but an educator as well. And my biggest takeaway from this was just simply John's never-ending search for his why he likes a photo, why he doesn't like a photo, what makes a photo work, what makes a photo not work. Because honestly, I mean, photography is, if you're just doing it for yourself, it is a very personal thing. It is a very personal art form. And I think the more that you can learn about yourself and your preferences, obviously, then the better and the stronger your images will become. And that's it. So just keep working on that. Keep asking yourself why. Why? And that is how you're going to become a better photographer. I would love to hear your biggest takeaway from this episode with John Greengo. Feel free to share it in the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group. If you're not a part already, just go ahead and search Facebook for Beginner Photography Podcast. You'll find it right there. Fantastic way to join in with other photographers as well, talk about photography, share your photos, ask questions, and again, love to hear your biggest takeaway. So that is it from this week, or for this week rather. Until next week, keep shooting, stay safe, I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to the Beginner Photography Podcast. If you enjoy the show, consider leaving a review in iTunes. Keep shooting, and we'll see you next week.